Ray, thank you for joining us.
No problem.
What brings you to Global Offshore Wind 2016?
Well, we've been coming to global offshore wind for a long time, and obviously Siemens, particularly in the offshore space, is the leading player in offshore wind. So for us, this is not necessarily about sales. Obviously, we know our clients very well, but it's a great opportunity to meet the whole industry in one place at one time. So we have a lot of scheduled meetings and a lot of ad hoc interaction with suppliers, customers, government, and a whole host of people across the industry.
Are your conversations focusing on any particular area?
My role is very much kind of future looking, so I'm involved in kind of business development and looking for the future, so where the market's going in the future, where the politics regulation is going, so what we're going to be doing in 5 to 10 years time, and obviously kind of tying in the investments that we're making in the UK to make sure we've got a future market for the big investments we're making right now.
And where are we going?
We see a strong future for offshore wind. We have a really strong pipeline of Siemens in the UK now, and of course in the kind of post-Paris world, we see our customers, particularly the big utilities, being driven towards having more low carbon solutions in their portfolios. And of course other technologies are kind of competing for that space, but we're not seeing the progress in some of those other areas that we can. So actually we're starting to increase some of our forecasts and see an even stronger future for offshore wind as perhaps some of the other technologies don't come to fruition as quickly as expected or fall away.
Yes, your commitment is obviously very clear with Hull.
It's a massive investment. This is one of Siemens' biggest investments worldwide. So a total investment between us and our partners in ABP of over £300 million. And obviously even big companies like Siemens don't make those kind of investments without seeing a future. So it's great that we're able to make that investment, creating up to 1,000 jobs and really seeing that come to fruition right now is really exciting. When we came to this conference 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about our future plans, and it's great to be able to share at the conference an update on what's happening and just how exciting that project is.
What do you think has caused this sudden expansion or explosion of the offshore wind industry?
Well, it's certainly not a sudden explosion. I think that's the key thing, that we've been talking about this for a long time. People like me that have been, and others that have been around offshore wind, 10 years ago we were talking about this big wave of projects that was coming, and it feels like a long time getting there. But now this really is becoming a mainstream industry. These are multi-billion pound contracts, and contract values in the hundreds of millions of pounds are kind of quite common in the industry. So we've got a more mature industry, a more mature supply chain, and that flow of projects has been a little stop-start, but at least we have some continuity now for the next few years going forward. And as I said, we look forward to kind of extending that into the next decade and hopefully an even brighter future for offshore wind.
What has brought that about?
It's partly government policy led, of course, that the increasing focus on both decarbonisation and as other forms of energy generation come off, the bold, simple fact is that we need to be investing in new electricity generation plant, and as renewables has become, particularly offshore wind, has become a mature technology and has driven down its costs to where it's getting very close to the costs of other technologies, it really has become mainstream. So it's become a very a secure option for the big utilities who, as I say, are looking to divest from their fossil fuel-based generation and move into the renewable space.
Looking to the future, because that's what you're predominantly focused on,
Yep.
Will there be any big changes, or do you think it will just carry on the current trajectory?
I think we've got a lot of momentum now. The industry is maturing. We're seeing a lot of rationalisation of the industry, so there's consolidation both in the developers and in the supply chain. So it really has the feel now of a kind of mature, grown-up industry. I think that will continue, but we've got some very strong companies. So some of the world's biggest names in terms of the utilities and indeed the supply chain are in this market now. And so it is a market where the big players will really dominate. But we also have some very exciting markets opening up. We're really at the very first steps in the US and Asia as well. So there are huge markets, particularly for offshore, to explore going forward as well. And they're really at the early stages. So they're where we were 8-10 years ago.
What are the scale of those projects?
The scope is potentially massive. I mean, if you think of the east coast of the US, there's a lot of coastline and a lot of area to go after. Asia has some different markets and perhaps some different technologies, like floating offshore wind farms may predominate there. But there really is a kind of massive scope, say, particularly in the US for offshore wind.
What next for Siemens?
We're going to continue the way we are going, of course, continuing to invest. We hope to continue to be market leader. And we look forward to delivering on the projects we have in Europe, continuing to grow in that space, and also to tackle those emerging markets of the US and Asia Pacific.
Ray, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.